How's it going, everybody? Hope you're doing well. Got some things I need to get to around here in a little bit, but before I do, I wanted to take some time and talk about something that's been coming up quite a bit lately, especially since we're knee-deep into the holiday season now. And that's the idea of triggers. Some of us have already found ourselves sitting around tables, or we will be sitting around tables, with people that we love dearly, but disagree with deeply on some fundamental things. Maybe it's politics, maybe it's religion, maybe it's something else. Or we'll be sitting around those tables or sitting shoulder to shoulder with people that we might not even like, barely be able to tolerate. We'll find that our sore spots are getting hit by certain things that might be said or certain actions that might be going on in the room. We might find ourselves rising to the argument, feeling like we need to die on a hill, or getting up and walking away out of anger or frustration, or saying something specifically meant to cut just so that we can win. Whatever the case, it's very easy to slip into patterns of saying things like, he pissed me off, or she upset me, or that made me feel like shit, as if people and events and places carry these little black boxes with them, and whenever the mood strikes them, they can pull those boxes out, press a button, and assume complete control over our actions. If we look at that hard enough, though, the truth is, that's all bullshit. What it comes down to is, how willing are we to turn our power over to those things? When you're a kid, you're pretty much at the mercy of the environment you grow up in and the people who inhabit that environment. You can't pack your fucking bags and move to Podunk when you're 3. That's just the way it goes. And so we learn to adjust. We learn to eat the food that we're given. And sometimes that food comes in the form of some pretty negative beliefs, pretty negative realities. We get told that we're an idiot. We get yelled at. Maybe we get beaten. Maybe we get emotionally abused, or even worse. We come to find out sometimes that the love that we really want is highly conditional, based upon how well we fall in line or dance to someone else's music. As we get older, though, we sometimes continue on with those beliefs. We can hear those stories again and again in our heads. And though the voices might sound like the people who said those things, might even be their words, sometimes those people have been out of our lives for years or even decades. Maybe they're even dead. So the question is, whose voice is it really? Bought into deeply enough, these beliefs can even turn into victimhood. And the ironic thing is, there's almost no greater scam of control than victimhood. So bear with me for a minute. Decades ago, there was this guy who was part of our group when I lived back in Northeast PA. As a kid, he'd been diagnosed with depression. This was somewhere in his teens, but rather than seek professional help, he decided to self-medicate. He'd been doing so for a long time when I met him, talking maybe 20 years. And I took a liking to the kid because he was older than I was, and so I kind of looked up to him. We had a lot of common interests in music. We had some common recreational habits. And he was a good guy to talk to. He had a really big heart. But one of the things that was known about him, one of the things that he was known for, was this constant mood of depression. This constant feeling of gloom that surrounded him, hung over him like a cloud. And so those of us who were his friends, we kind of went out of our way to cheer him up, paid him a few extra visits, invited him to events. Sometimes we had to beg him to come. And when he got to these events, parties, whatnot, sometimes he had a good time. But a lot of the times he just sat there, sullen, and exuded this cold feeling of sadness. And those of us who were there went out of our way to make sure he had enough to eat, make sure he had enough to drink, to go over and talk to him, to try and cheer him up. And so the event became about him. Now, he wasn't specifically asking for it, at least not cognitively, consciously, but that's what happened. I stopped hanging out with him to such a great degree when I moved out of Northeast PA, and eventually my visits back home got less and less. I knew that there were certain things I had to cut out of my life if I wanted to survive. But I got to thinking about him, and I decided I'd check in on him, and sure enough, even though it was a couple of decades later, he was still running the same game. So I set up an appointment to go pick him up, drive him back down to my apartment, have him spend the weekend, cooked him some food, bought some beer, hung out with him, and the next day, I took him home. And I realized something. He never asked. Now, checking in on a friend is a cool thing, especially if that friend is, in a bad way. But I also realized something. He needed to carry that cross. He needed to be perceived in that way. And there wasn't a goddamn thing he was going to do about it. And so, without any hatred in my heart, with nothing but love for him, I walked away. When we feel ourselves slipping into being triggered, or even jumping into victimhood, one of the things that we can do is begin to notice where those triggers hit us in our bodies. Is there a feeling that goes along with this? Does it have an age? And instead of saying things like, he's pissing me off, or she is upsetting me, giving our power away, we can kind of flip that. And we can say, in the presence of this, I feel like that. So, for example, in the presence of confrontation, I feel small. What that does is it takes back some of that responsibility, some of that power that we've been giving away, and turns it back in on ourselves. And now we can look at the fact that our body is reacting in a certain way. But we can begin to notice when it does. We can start to assume responsibility and to begin to understand where our wounds are. And as we do that often enough, we can begin to sense those feelings inside of us before they explode outward, before we crash and burn into the control game of victimhood or blind anger. And we can start to take back some of what we've been so willingly giving away. And that's when the true healing can start. It's not easy. In fact, it's some of the most difficult work that some of us will ever do. But it is necessary if we're ever going to move on. Until next time.